Dear students, let's continue our topic, Nazism and the rise of Hitler. In this part, you will learn about the Nazi worldview, establishment of the racial state, and the racial utopia. The Nazi worldview. The crimes that Nazis committed were linked to a system of belief and a set of practices. Nazi ideology was synonymous with Hitler's worldview. According to this, there was no equality between people, but only a racial hierarchy. In his view, blonde, blue-eyed, Nordic German Aryan were at the top, while Jews were located at the lowest rung. They came to be regarded as an anti-race, the arch-enemies of the Aryans. All other colored people were placed in between depending upon their external features. Hitler's racism borrowed from thinkers like Charles Darwin and Herbert Spencer. Darwin was a natural scientist who tried to explain the creation of plants and animals through the concept of evolution and natural selection. Herbert Spencer later added the idea of survival of the fittest. According to this idea, only those species survived on Earth that could adapt themselves to changing climatic conditions. We should bear in mind that Darwin never advocated human interventions in what he thought was a purely natural process of selection. However, his ideas were used by racist thinkers and politicians to justify imperial rule over conquered peoples. The Nazi argument was simple. The strongest race would survive and the weak ones would perish. The Aryan race was the finest. It had to retain its purity, become stronger, and dominate the world. Dear students, the other aspect of Hitler's ideology related to the geopolitical concept of Lebensraum, or living space. He believed that new territories had to be acquired for settlement. This would enhance the area of the mother country, while enabling the settlers on new lands to retain an intimate link with the place of their origin. It would also enhance the material resources and power of the German nation. Hitler intended to extend German boundaries by moving eastwards to concentrate all German geographically in one place. Poland became the laboratory for this experimentation. Dear students, now we are going to discuss about establishment of the racial state. Once in power, the Nazis quickly began to implement their dream of creating an exclusive racial community of pure Germans by physically eliminating all those who were seen as undesirable in the extended empire. Nazis wanted only a society of pure and healthy Nordic Aryans. They alone were considered desirable. Only they were seen as worthy of prospering and multiplying against all others who were classed as undesirable. Dear students, this meant that Even those Germans who were seen as impure or abnormal had no right to exist. Under the euthanasia program, Ham's father, along with other Nazi officials, had condemned to death many Germans who were considered mentally or physically unfit. Jews were not only community classified as undesirable, there were others. Many Gypsies and blacks living in Nazi Germany were considered as racial inferiors who threatened the biological purity of the superior Aryan race. They were widely persecuted. Even Russians and Poles were considered subhuman and hence undeserving of any humanity. When Germany occupied Poland and the parts of Russia, captured civilians were forced to work as slave labor. Many of them died simply through hard work and starvation. Dear students, Jews remained the worst sufferers in Nazi Germany. Nazi hatred of Jews had a precursor in the traditional Christians' hostility towards Jews. They had been stereotyped as killers of Christ and usurers. Until medieval times, Jews were barred from owning land. They survived mainly through trade and money lending. They lived in separately marked areas called ghettos. They were often persecuted through periodic organized violence and expulsion from the land. However, Hitler's hatred of Jews was based on pseudoscientific theories of race, which held that conversion was no solution to the Jews' problems. It could be solved only through their total eliminations. So, dear students, from 1933 to 1938, the Nazi terrorized, pauperized, and segregated the Jews, compelling them to leave the country. The next phase, 1939 to 1945, aimed at concentrating them in certain areas and eventually killing them in gas chambers in Poland. The racial utopia. Under the shadow of war, the Nazis proceeded to realize their murderous racial ideal. Genocide and the war become two sides of the same coin. Occupied Poland was divided up. Much of northwestern Poland was annexed to Germany. Poles were forced to leave their homes and properties behind to be occupied by ethnic Germans brought in from occupied Europe. Poles were then herded like cattle in other parts called the general government, the destination of all undesirable of the empire. Members of the Polish intelligentsia were murdered in large numbers in order to keep the entire people intellectually and spiritually servile. Polish children who looked like Aryans were forcibly snatched from their mothers and examined by race experts. If they passed the race test, they were raised in German families, and if not, they were deposited in orphanages where most perished. With some of the largest ghettos and gas chambers, the general government also served as the killing fields for the Jews. Dear children, let's recap the portion. We have discussed the Nazi worldview. According to Nazi ideology, there was no equality between people but only racial hierarchy. Then we have discussed the establishment of the racial state. Nazis came into power and quickly began to implement their dream of creating an exclusive racial community of pure Germans. At last, we have discussed regarding the racial utopia. Genocide and war became two sides of the same coin. Thank you, students. Have a nice day.